Meanwhile, Israel's Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations has described South Africa's genocidal intent case before the International Court of Justice as an obscene invasion of reality. He was speaking at a sitting of the Security Council yesterday to discuss Friday's interim measure issued against Tel Aviv by the Hague-based court. Let's discuss this further now with International Relations Director General Zane Dangor. Good to have you, DG, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. As you were heading to The Hague, the Office of the Prime Minister would have described that action that you brought before the ICJ as playing advocate for the devil and being criminally complicit to genocide that was meted out on the Israelis. Is that still the position of the Israeli government?
Well, I think we're judging from what the Deputy Ambassador said at the Security Council meeting last night. I think they're still digging their heels in. We have seen a sort of a less virulent level of complaints coming through. We've also seen them, stepping back from, some of these statements being made by their senior government officials. Just last week, 12 ministers attended a conference in Jerusalem where they were again calling for the depopulation of Gaza, which is again the incitement towards genocide. And the Prime Minister somehow found it within him to distance himself from those 12 ministers of his cabinet. But we also see that, the ruling at the ICJ has got a profound effect. And it's not only those 15 judges at the ICJ, esteemed judges, who found that there's plausible cases of genocide against Israel. Irrespective of how the Israelis and others want to spin it, the judgment is clear. They found plausible case of genocidal acts, and that's the only way in which they could give the provisional orders. And yesterday, in one of the federal courts in the U.S., a judge found that the ICJ ruling was plausible, and he too found that there were plausible cases of genocide. And this was in a case brought to that court by civil society organizations on behalf of Palestinians whose families were killed. And the only reason he could not take the case further was on a jurisdictional matter. But that ruling too is quite profound. So it's not just the ICJ that's finding that. You're finding that in other national courts, in other parts of the world, similar findings are being made. So, the idea that South Africa is acting on behalf of other interests is untrue. We're acting, our main aim was to stop the killing, and the court has found in our favor the very first two orders. The first order from the court, cites the Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, and that very first article there states stop the killing. The second order, directs the Israeli government to ensure that the IDF does not contravene any of the items outlined in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Again, the first article there is stop the killing. Yeah. So we've actually achieved what we wanted to achieve in the provisional measures, but of course the merits, the substantive case will continue after this.
So what's your position now? Are you asserting that Israel is just simply ignoring that judgment? But two, are you also, based on your statement that the minister delivered yesterday, anticipating non-action from the UN Security Council?
Look, we're watching quite keenly the deliberations at the Security Council yesterday, and we found that, unfortunately, the U.S. ambassador, they erroneously indicated that the court sort of confirmed their interpretation of Israel's right to self-defense, which was their justification for the actions that they've taken. The judgment there is very clear. The court in the ICJ just noted that the right to self-defense was used by Israel as a defense, but they did not bother to take that any further because they did not have to, as our ambassador said, because the court knows very well that their own ruling in the 2004 case rules out the right to self-defense of an occupying power against people that they occupy. So again, that gave us an indication that they're still rationalizing by some states about the actions of Israel and how they are supporting it, despite the overwhelming evidence that this is a genocide, and it's a textbook case of genocide. And in fact, the world's highest court is now saying that that is a plausible, it's really plausible, and that our case had a lot more than just merit. So we are really worried that the Security Council will be again found to be ineffective in ensuring that they do their job in ensuring that peace and security globally is upheld. So we are concerned about that.
Do you think the United States is in violation of the Genocide Convention at this point?
All third-party states, and third-party states mean states that are not party to this particular court case, but they are parties to the Genocide Convention, are as bound to the convention as we are. Article 1 of the convention basically states that all state parties have to prevent or punish genocide, but it also talks about aiding and abetting. So third-party states are in real danger of falling foul of aiding and abetting if this case does prove on the merits to be genocide. Already, the idea that it's plausible should give them caution, and the fact that it's plausible genocide should give them caution that they may be found wanting legally in terms of their own obligations under the Genocide Convention.
Parties that, or countries, shall I say, that have cut their funding for UNRWA, are they in violation of some international law?
I think one could interpret that as being complicit. A lot of international lawyers have made this assertion. If you look at one of the orders given by the ICJ, is that Israel must ensure that it takes all measures to ensure that that humanitarian aid flows unhindered into Gaza. UNRWA is the institution that is providing most of that aid at the moment. And cutting the funding a few days after that ruling, based on allegations that 0.4% of its staff members, I think it's 7 out of a staff component of about 13,000, may be involved in October 7th, and that is not even yet proven, does amount to complicity in ensuring that the suffering continues, that the irreparable harm that we asked to be stopped will continue, including starvation. And already now some of the experts in humanitarian affairs are saying that starvation is no longer just a threat, it's happening. People are going to be dying of starvation. So, there's a real risk there too that there is complicity in the manner in which they've defunded UNRWA.
The anti-Semitism claims that the Minister of Criminal Justice has had to answer to. Is Dirk looking at that, and do you hold a particular view on those reports that the Minister has had to answer to?
Look, I think that the statistics that was used in posing the question to the Minister of Justice is unfounded. South Africa is one of the safest places for people of all faiths, including people of the Jewish religion. South African government has got all the hate speech tools to deal with hate speech when and if it arises, and that includes anti-Jewish hatred. So we will take action against that. But there has been no ticking up of anti-Semitism in the country. I think that they used a report from the South African Jewish Report, which had more innuendo than fact. And if you look at the response by the South African Jews for Free Palestine, they're refuting it themselves. So I think it will be useful to get one of them on the show where they can speak about the fact that, our country is very tolerant of all religions. And this, our issue in the occupation should never be seen as, support for or against the occupation should never be seen as people of one religion or many others against another. It's really about a political system that people of all faiths either support or don't support. It's a political decision, and the idea that taking action against genocide could lead to anti-Semitism or is anti-Semitic is unfortunate, and in many cases is deflecting from the real issue of confronting the actions of the Israeli government, which is contravening all forms of international law. Even if, for example, on the merits, it's found that the crime of crimes is not at play, of course, then war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious crimes of concern to the international community are definitely at play. So those are the issues that I think we must be focusing on.
there's been some backlash to a statement also made by Dangor around the economic backlash, if you like, following the ICJ ruling. And a question was put to say, well, there could be, of course, repercussion in terms of trading agreements that would exist, for example, between Israel and South Africa. And people say, well, the minister was quite flippant in how she answered to say, well, we'll just go look at other markets. Is the department overstating, I suppose, its intention for international solidarity at the expense of the national interest?
Look, I think part of our national interest is, our national interest is also ensconced with what we call national values, and that includes respect for human rights, respect for the oppressed. We have a national interest document that outlines that very clearly. Of course, there are economic components of our diplomatic work, but we shouldn't actually become one where we reduce, almost a reductionist approach, that we should shy away from calling out some of the most abhorrent attacks that we've seen in recent history for fear of economic reprisals. I don't think many states will take action against South Africa for calling out what is clearly an abhorrent set of events. We're calling it genocide. The majority of the world tends to agree with us. Some don't tend to agree on the issue of genocide. But even as you've heard, even in your clip from President Biden, there too there's concern about what's happening in Gaza. And I don't think that there will be that kind of punishment for South Africa on the actions that we are taking. I think the point the minister was making is that while some countries have been critical, the vast majority of the countries in the world have been very supportive. The entire non-aligned movement countries, the G77 and China countries, but generally we found that even people from countries in the West, where some of the politicians, for example, may be critical, but the people themselves, including sometimes diplomats who will do this anonymously, are very supportive of what we have been doing.
So the other comment is comments from the president, speaking in his capacity as president of the ANC, closing the Lekgotla, saying that there is a backlash or a fight back, if you like, is the word that he used, from the ruling at the ICJ, interfering with domestic politics and possible electoral outcomes with the view of regime change being brought about. Has President canvassed this with cabinet? Are you talking about it? Is this something that is being spoken about at the moment?
Well, I wouldn't be able to speak on that. I think that will be something for the president and or the ANC to answer. I think that, within government, we will be watching if there's any threat to the elections. And of course, we've got a very robust IEC and we've got a very robust election management system. So, obviously, those kind of monitors and checks and balances will be in place.
That's the DG for Dangor there. Zane Dangor, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on this evening.